that the basic philosophy between the so-called extreme left people, on communists and socialists, and the so-called philosophy on the right of the fascists and the Nazis was really the same. How can this be? They're supposed to be opposites of each other. And then I began to realize that there is something more common to all of these philosophies that was left out of my training and education. And that was the ideology of collectivism. I began to realize that the thing that was common to them all is something called collectivism. And I realized that communism and fascism, the so-called opposites, are merely variants of collectivism. They're the same thing. And they believe that the group is more important than the individual, for example. And the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. They believe that the state should be all-powerful and that the people should obey the state for the greater good of the greater number and all of that sort of thing. They believe that rights are granted by the state. They're not part of the human being. They're not God-given. They're not entrenched in his body and soul. They have to be granted by the state. All of these things, and you look at them one by one, communists and fascists and Nazis and socialists, they all believe that. So wherein lies the conflict, you see? And I began to question that. And I realized that it's partly a trick. In fact, I think it's a huge trick. It's a great scam because people even today are thinking that they have to choose between the right or the left, not realizing that no matter which way they go, they've accepted basically the same ideology underneath. Now, it's true that the leaders of these groups, like the Stalins of the world and the Adolf Hitlers of the world and the Mao Zedongs of the world and so forth, the leaders of these groups on left and right will fight each other. And they will go to war with each other. And there will be tremendous battles, as we saw in World War II, for example. But what are they fighting over? Ideology? Not at all, because they agree on ideology. What they're fighting over is dominance. Who is going to rule? That's all they're fighting over. And once you get that picture historically, it's not too difficult to see that that's the same thing going on even today. There's a fellow by the name of Carroll Quigley, who's a former history professor at Georgetown University. There's the whole scam behind this left-right paradigm. When you understand this history and this reality, you look at it and you say, well, yes, we've got a left wing and a right wing, but they're just opposite wings of the same ugly bird, and that bird is called collectivism. There are certain issues that people on the left and the right in American politics will never discuss. And the reason they won't discuss them is because they agree mutually. The Democrats and the Republicans agree on something, so they don't want to talk about it in public debate because it reveals the fact that they're basically the same. They only talk about things on which they disagree. Turns out that the things on which they agree are the most important things. The things in which they disagree are relatively minor. So the things in which they agree are, for example, our foreign policy. They both agree that the desired goal eventually is to move the United States into world government. Not just any world government, but a world government based on the model of collectivism. In other words, big, powerful, centralized world government. If it were a world government based on the principles of freedom and freedom of choice, freedom of culture, low intervention, if no intervention in the lives of normal human beings, it might be a wonderful thing, but that's not the kind of world government the left and the right have in mind. They're talking about total world government with all major decisions being made at the top and people at the bottom being essentially living in a feudalist society, just serfs and peasants basically in a high-tech feudalism. And the left and the right both agree with that goal, and so they never discuss it in public debate. It was Lenin who said it so well. Lenin said, words are one thing, actions another. Of course, when Lenin wrote that, what he was telling his followers is that tell them what they want to hear. Don't worry about telling a lie. They want to hear lies, he said. Words are one thing. Tell them what they want to hear. Get elected. Come to power. When you're in power, he said, then do what you want to do. Words are one thing, actions another. So he was advocating lying. Well, believe me, professional politicians understand this same technique. They would never come out and advocate it in public. They'd deny it. But look at their records. Don't listen to their words. Look at their actions, and then you'll know what kind of a game they're playing with us. It's a matter of historical record that the group of people that sometimes we call capitalists, the big, super wealthy families, you know, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the heads of the big corporations in America, AT&T, Ford Motor Company, and so forth. People think of them as the super capitalists. It's a historical fact that many of these people have provided the funding, the essential funding, to help bring to power regimes such as Hitler's regime that was well funded by American financiers and British, and also in communist Russia, the group there, the Leninist group, was well funded by American and London bankers, and so it's tempting to say, well, they created their own opposition. And I think that's partially true, but I wouldn't go that far. I think what these people do is they look around and they see what kind of native opposition is out there, and or what kind of native groups are growing, movements are growing, that they really want to control. Maybe they don't necessarily create them, but they see which ones are coming to the front, and those are the ones they move into. And if you have enough money, you know, millions and millions of dollars, it's not too difficult to gain influence over almost any new group that's struggling against its opposition and looking for money. So they've played this game. They played it in both the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany. Another tactic, isn't it, that the opposition knows that the American people, any people in the world, will gladly give up their liberty and their comforts if it's in their mind a means of gaining security, protection against a dreaded threat of some kind. That's why regimes that are struggling to hold the loyalty of their people are very dangerous regimes, because instinctively they know they have to go to war. They know that in time of war, the people will rally behind their leaders, no matter what, because we're at war. And if we lose this war, we'll be invaded, we'll be conquered by some dreaded enemy. And so, throughout history, governments that are weak or losing influence over their own people traditionally start wars, or they manufacture false flag operations against themselves. They create their own enemies. They want to be victims so that they can rally their citizens behind them, and anybody who wants to continue criticizing these leaders is then branded as being unpatriotic, or possibly even branded as a traitor. So it's an old ploy. It's been done throughout history. Machiavelli wrote about it. Every time there's a crisis, every time there's a war, every time there's a terrorist attack, or if there's a banking crisis, no matter what the crisis is, this movement toward totalitarianism accelerates. And then it slows down until the next crisis comes along. And